We are at 11 o'clock according to my clock. Hello everybody, good morning. Hope you're all having a wonderful time at CONvergence. My name is Faith. I write as FDUV and I'm going to be moderating this wonderful panel this morning. I'm very excited to talk about worlds and characters and worlds. I think if we go through, if the panelists would like to introduce themselves, maybe we can start with JR.
I'm Jen, I write as JR Dawson. I write mostly magical realism, speculative fiction. This is the book that came out a year ago, and it's now in paperback as of a couple of weeks ago. And the first great thing is that he took The Greatest Showman meets X-Men and made it very weird. And so it's a magical gay circus that takes place in the 1920s in the Midwest. I also am a professor at the Drexel University's MFA program where I teach world building.
Amazing.
Hi, I'm Hario. I write young adult, paranormal. I currently going to the University of Toronto with a master's in creative writing and publishing. I have a short story that was published in the anthology of the Vampire Connoisseur called The Regency.
I'm Danith McPherson. I write science fiction and fantasy. Started out doing a lot of short stories and then moved into novels. I also have mystery that I wrote because, of course, I live in Minnesota, so I had to write a mystery about a body in a lake. It's in the Covenant. If you look it up and you're a writer, you have to do that in Minnesota. My most recent thing that was published is I have a short story in this anthology, Space Cowboys, and that was a move and a half, so that was fun.
I'm Joe. I write mostly urban fantasy with some regular fantasy and science fiction. I've been dabbling in lit RPG and isekai recently. And I also teach freshman composition at Concordia University.
Excellent. Wow, we've got a very knowledgeable panel here today. So I'm going to kick off, I think, with what I hope is a nice, easy question to get everybody in the mood for talking. What examples of character and world building can you think of that work really well together? Your favourites, character world building combinations? Would you like to start with us, JR?
Oh, okay. Well, I just came off of the Adults Like It Too panel, so my brain is all rotted with animation right now, so I'm just gonna put it out there that I think that Centaur World is a really good character built for world and world built for character. As the panel goes on, I will probably find more literary examples, but right now it's 11 a.m. But yeah, no, if you haven't seen Centaur World, they have two very specific worlds that live kind of next to each other that are going to have to come back together by the end of the series, but one of them is super dire and dark and has been at war for decades. And then the other one is silly, like Adventure Time, and everybody eats giggle cakes. And so one of the characters from the scary world ends up stuck in the silly world. It's very interesting how the creator made those characters for the world and the world for those characters, and how even the characters and who they are affect the world building and how these worlds are set up and what is the future and the past and the present of these places.
Okay, so it's partly because I got back into them in the last few years for X-Men, but the X-Men Krakoa era. Because there's so much storylines of those characters interacting with the island of Krakoa, and just that whole new different government situation. And I think also, especially when you have characters been around for decades, there's a certain point where it's like, what have you done? Can you do what you haven't already done? Okay, let's throw Cyclops and Jean on the dark side of the moon, kind of thing.
I'm going to go with a classic. I really like Dune and the way that the Fremen culture is very much dictated by the environment of the planet. And then you see what happens when people who did not grow up in that environment come in to the planet. They don't understand the significance of water, and so they have like palm trees that have to be specially watered all the time. And so I really appreciate that interplay of the environment, you know, the structure of the planet, and what kind of people, what people need to do in order to survive on it. And I also like it because there's a lot about having to dress for the planet and having to wear a still suit so that you can survive on the planet, and living underground and that kind of thing too. So I definitely go with the classical Dune.
Dune is actually one of my answers also. And I really particularly like the seeding of the myth within the Fremen culture that the Bene Gesserit Sisterhood had done so many years ago, and so Paul really fits into the culture there. So that's really great that you chose that. My other choice, and this may be a bit obscure, is John Taylor in the Nightside series. If you've ever read that, he is in a lot of ways literally built for that world and affects that world and changes it as he goes. And while the books do seem like they're 2 pages of wonderful introduction to this amazing character who is then immediately killed on the 3rd page, and while that does seem to happen quite a bit over the course of the series, it really shows his impact on the world and the world affecting him. He may try to leave, but he can't. Every time he does, he gets pulled back in. And so that's one of them.
Excellent, thank you all so much. Yeah, I couldn't agree more about Jude in particular. I think it's phenomenal how important the setting is to the characters and what happens to them in that series. But also, I mean, I've only managed the first 3 June books, I confess now, and they are heavy books to read. There's a lot to take in, which leads me on to my second question, which do you think that the reader, listener, viewer, do they need to know as much about the world as you, the creator, or I suppose the characters do? Would you like me to pick someone to start?
Okay, I'll start. I think that when it's done right, you have the character who's an outsider who's coming in so that we can explain things to the audience in a way that doesn't just feel like somebody going, well, as you know, all the time. But I think that the audience doesn't need to know as much as the author does, but they'll start to learn more as you go through, because those kinds of things get dropped in as common knowledge when things like Paul knows exactly how to wear the still suit naturally. And so they go, well, that must mean something. Or anytime in any book where a character is able to say, I know that the world works this way, so I know that this is the next step I should go on in my investigation. That really allows us to show the world as it's connected to the character. So I really feel like the character and the world are coming out together rather than as separate entities.
I love the character that's the outsider who comes in, because that is such a wonderful way to explore the world, because the people who live there already know it, and there's stuff that they don't have to explain to one another. I definitely think that the writer and the characters need to know a lot more than what goes into the text. And I also like when small things show up that are indicators that, okay, this person lives there and understands it. I don't get it. I think maybe I will get it later. Now, that can be, unfortunately, carried to the extreme, where I think I'm currently reading a book right now, and I really feel like the writer should be giving me more clues about things, because I'm feeling like I'm having to figure out too much. So it's a balance that you have to come up with. But definitely, you better know more than what you tell your reader?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is no, but you want to avoid info dump as a writer. But I think the other thing to point out is, as a writer, I personally have the problem where research is fun. And so when you're doing the research, doing the world building, it's really easy to go down the rabbit hole. And I think trying to keep yourself anchored to, okay, what does the character care about? What are they going to interact with? And try to be like, okay, that's the part we'll focus on. There's other stuff that's good to know, but if it's not in the story, just type it up in a Word document, you know, save it for something else.
So I think that the writer definitely needs to know more than the character or the reader, because we're building the thing. And so even if we don't use it in text, we need to feel confident enough that we can write like an entire travel book about this world. When it comes to characters, it's really interesting in like magical realism, because sometimes the characters know a lot, and sometimes the characters don't know why. Like, it's just like, and then that thing happened. And then there's magic. And I think that you can work a lot with a character in dramatic irony, and also like the magic system and how it affects the character by how each what does each individual character know? Is there somebody who knows more than somebody else? Is it that the world doesn't know this thing about the magic system or about whatever is going on? You as the writer need to know. But and then when it comes to the reader, I guess it depends, kind of like what I said yesterday on the research panel that we were both on, is that you need to decide like what is your genre and what is the purpose for writing, because there is the science fiction where you want to know, the reader wants to know every single thing about that robot, about that planet. And then there's the science fiction where it's like, I don't know, the robot learned to love and the planet is made of jello. And we don't really want to know or care, right? So it really depends on what is the genre expectation, and who are you writing it for. Like a story from Asimov is going to be very different than a story from Becky Chambers.
Just to pick up on something that Lisa was talking about, even if you're writing something that takes place right now, you are still world building, because you are picking and choosing. You know all about this world. You don't have to describe every single thing. You pick the things that are appropriate for the story and the things that are appropriate to show your character. So you're always going to have filtering that you're going to do with world building, whether it is taking place on Earth current time, or if it's taking place on another planet.
While that is true, I think a lot of the times when I'm writing urban fantasy, which is set in today and in our world, I feel like I'm cheating a lot at creating the setting, because I can say, like, I went down to Nicollet Mall, and I don't have to imagine where that is. I've got a map, and I can point it, it's right there. Or, you know, anywhere else in Minneapolis or in the general region. And while there are some things, because there, as far as I know, aren't actually werewolves, witches, and wizards, and all that kind of stuff, as far as I know, I've yet to get my letter. Yeah, well, there are definitely witches, yeah, but because there is an element that you are creating, there's definitely some things that you are saying, like you're saying, that you still have to decide and you still have to filter. But I feel like a lot of it, when you're writing in something that is modern day, there's a lot you don't have to do. You don't have to come up with a monetary system, you don't have to come up with jobs, you don't have to come up with where people are going.
A long time ago, I actually had hit this realization about why is fantasy worlds like virtually always in a feudal or like medieval setting. And I realized it's because it's easy. Because most people understand the basic structure of a feudal society, so you don't have to spend a lot of time explaining stuff. And also, like, nobility has a lot of free time, So if you just think about it like, if you have the modern day and somebody has a day job, well, how are you going to say that they go to their boss about how I had to make a short trip to the other world and we're gone for 2 weeks to go save the world? You know, you just don't have to deal with that kind of stuff in a fantasy, in a medieval setting.
Going back to what Joe said, though, I think that it's also important that if you have a modern day setting or a real world setting, this dimension setting, that you do go and research those things and make sure that you have readers that aren't from the area. Like my next book takes place in Chicago, and there are a lot of things in Chicago that I took for granted that everybody would know, and it is not true. Like I said, the lake, there's like this whole thing where the lake is the river Styx in the book. It is a main part of the thing, and people are like, what lake? I was like, what do you mean, what lake? It's like a lot of people don't know that Lake Michigan is like this big beachfront on Chicago. The idea of like, what are the different neighborhoods? What is an L? So there's a lot that goes into these big cities. I mean, like, I just moved to the Twin Cities, and I'm still very, like, people say something, I'm like, I don't know what that is. Like, I know, like what was it, a couple of weeks ago, like, everybody started saying to get your A or something? Is that what it, like it was some kind of something for a sports, I was like, what is going on here? They're like, oh yeah, Pride, it's in Loring Park. I'm like, oh yes, Loring Park, I know where that is. And also, like, if you continue to look into the history of your city, you're gonna find some really cool stuff. Like, I wanted to incorporate the Chicago fire somehow, and I didn't know a lot about the Chicago fire, even though I lived in Chicago, and like, you know, but like, that was another thing where I kept being in the text, like, the fire, the Chicago fire, the fire, and everybody's like, okay, the fire's not scary, why are you trying to scare us with this fire? And I was like, you know, and like, I took out like this big picture of like a tornado fire, and I was like, it ruined the city. Like, it was down. Like, all these people died, like, it jumped the river. It was scary. And I think that when people outside of Chicago think of the fire, they think, oh, Mrs. O'Leary's cow, it was a barn fire. But like, no, this thing was devastating. And so looking into that, I also looked into like how it actually started, it was not a cow. And like, what were the socioeconomic problems of infrastructure at the time. And it turned out that there was a lot of really cool stuff I could do with how the fire like burned through the city, with one of my characters who ends up starting the fire in the book. And I don't want to give anything else away, but it's really cool to like look into your city history and also find a reader that doesn't live in your region.
I think, yeah, for myself, who very much does not live in the region of Chicago, I know nothing about the Chicago fire, so that's a Wikipedia dive for me, or possibly I'll just wait to hear for your book about it. But I think it's very interesting what all of you have said about the idea of genre and purpose, and potentially having a character who comes from the outside in some form or another. I think famously Jurassic Park had the kids, right?
Oh.
Because they needed somebody to explain the science to. So I guess with that in mind, and I'll let you choose who answers first again. What comes for you as creators? Where do you start with your writing? Do you start with character? Do you start with world? Or is it a bit of a blah kind of process?
I like that sound. That sound is my head.
Lisa, do you want to
Okay.
pick this up?
I would say it depends. Part of it is, so I have my own world of old blood, which has vampires and, you know, all that paranormal jazz. And Avalon is basically a school for training. And so I kind of have this whole world I've been building up for a long time. And so it's easy for me to kind of play in the sandbox of like, okay, I already know the world, so I have a character here. Whereas if I get an idea for something that's outside of the world, then it might be like a world might come first in that situation. If it's something totally different, if I want to play on something I haven't explored before.
I hate to say it depends, but it does depend. For this one, there's no doubt that I was working on the setting first, Monarch of Lightning. It takes place on another planet, and I had this thought about having a planet and having some kind of feature on the planet that would separate two social structures, two communities, and what would those communities be? And so I started with that, which was great fun. But this one, I definitely started with the characters, because the two main characters are fencers. And they're modern day fencers who end up in a medieval setting where there is medieval fencing of sorts. And so it's a clash between those two. So it does depend. You know, one of the things that, Jen, that you were talking about with the Chicago fire and then having the fire come into your story, it is really neat to, you know, to have a world and then have something in it and say, oh, I can use that. Mm-hmm. I can use that with this character, and it will be really, really cool. So you don't necessarily have to know all of that ahead of time. As you're developing your world, you can find wonderful little nuggets that fit in with your plot and with your characters, and use them.
So I actually start with what's the what if or the magic, and then I figure out the rest of it. I think that like I have like kind of like this room of characters that I want to work on at some point. I'm like, you'd be fun to write, and they just kind of stick around, kind of like, well, is it this book? Nope, maybe the next one. Or, oh, this one would fit me. And then from that what if question being like, what would the best setting, what would the best world be for this? Which I've learned is not what everyone does. A lot of people are like, I really want to work in this world. It looks like this and this and this. And I was like, wow, that's really cool. My brain doesn't go like that. So this book, which takes place now in the 1920s Midwest, started in space as a space circus, and it wasn't working. So I think that the idea of character coming in and world coming in under this idea of like, what is the speculative element going to be is what usually works best for me personally.
While I do, if I'm writing something like science fiction, there are a couple of questions that you have to answer about setting first. You know, is there faster light travel? And if so, how does it work? Things like that. For me, it's always the character first. The character kind of shows up on a blank, empty stage and just starts talking, and the main thing I do is I ask them, what annoys you? And then usually they start telling me all about the world and the things that bother them throughout that world. So like when I created AJ, my tattooed witch in the book, Between Death and a Hard Place, I asked her what annoys her, and she was like, the coven system. The whole thing of witches being so sorority-like and bitchy about who gets to be and who doesn't get to be, and it just became this whole thing. But it all started from me just having her there and being like, okay, you're a witch, you've got tattoos, you're a tattoo artist, what pisses you off? And she just kind of went, well, I have a list.
That's so cool.
I know he's not a good guy, but I do want to give credit where credit's due. And something I read by Orson Scott Card is that writing is usually not one idea, so you get two ideas. So you can get one idea and then a decade later get the second idea, and it's when you get the two ideas and put them together that you really start with the story.
I love that, and is a good one to read if you're taking a look at character and world building and the interplay of the two. You know, the Ender's Game books.
Yeah, as you said, not a great guy, but did have some really good writing voice.
Yeah, unfortunately being talented at something doesn't make you a good person.
Right.
I think, yeah, it's very tricky, isn't it? I what you were saying, Danith, about kind of finding nuggets of things and seeing how you can use them and where you can find them. Many years ago, I watched a BBC documentary and discovered that in ancient China they had kind of desert cities where they built kind of under the sand, and that's coming. I've got a book that's been sitting in my brain for about 7 years, and I'm just waiting to make good use of that kind of fact. So I guess it depends a bit, because like Joe, for example, you said that you write quite a lot of urban fantasy, whereas I get the impression elsewhere that you guys are writing more kind of other worlds fantasies or other worlds science fictions or historical. I don't know, I always think of historical as being other worlds because it's kind of so far away. So this might be a kind of I'm not sure what you will do with this question, so I'm excited to see where you go with it. But how deep do you build your worlds? How far down the rabbit hole do you go? Joe, do you want to start?
I go one step deeper than I'm planning on showing. Sometimes as I'm writing, I find that I need to go deeper, and so I do that, but I always try and stay just the one step, because while I do want it all to be consistent and make sense, I want to spend more time talking about the story and the characters than I do about the setting. The setting does matter, it is hugely important, and sometimes it's a character in and of itself. But I only want to show people what they need to see to be able to get the story. I think I'm just paranoid about info dumping, and so I want to avoid doing that.
I tend to go down the rabbit hole. I like to know the geography, the flora and fauna, the cultures. I like to figure out what, I'm a sewer, and I make kilts, by the way. I'm a trained kilt maker.
Is it?
Yes. I'm wearing my kilts all over the con today. And so I like to think about what kind of clothing the culture has, because you have the very practical clothing, which is usually common people would wear, and then as you move up with wealth, you get into clothing that is less practical and more showy and that kind of thing. And so I like to figure that out. In the olden days, when I was writing, I would make a list of all the things I wanted to research. I'd say, okay, I'd write something, okay, insert here, make a note, do this research. But, now I can just say, oh, I'll just Google that. And that can take up a lot of time, because one thing leads you to another, so I have to kind of be careful about that. And I wish I could remember the name of the writer. I'm sorry, I can't, but there is a science fiction fantasy writer who was obsessing about the color of a carpet in some kind of a men's club in England, and was spent apparently a whole lot of time trying to figure out historically what the carpet looked like. And so I kind of keep that in my mind so that I don't get that far down.
Yeah, that way madness lies, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm it with research because I'm such a research geek. Well, first of all, the stuff I'm legitimately interested in gets way overdeveloped. So like I can write all about like an Avalon, like their clothing and their food system, and then when it comes to technology, it's like, they have solar power. Okay, move on, next thing. But I just know one of the reasons why I don't have too much publishing credits is because I really got stuck down in the rabbit hole of world building, and it's like, it's great to create the world and to figure out the backstory and like how the grandmother's childhood fits into the main character's childhood, but there's a point you gotta write the damn story. I'm sorry.
Yeah, there are definitely times when researching sends you down a huge rabbit hole, and you have where normally it takes you an hour to write, however much you write in a day, And then that day it takes you 3 hours to write 3 words because you were looking up all of the coloring and what carpets used to
What
do.
colours the carpet? Yeah.
Yeah.
Julia V is an urban fantasy writer, and she has a rule that she is allowed 3 Google searches a day.
That's too strict.
Yeah.
And I really admire writers who can do, in effect, an info dump without it feeling like an info dump.
Yeah.
Lee Bardugo can do that. Where it's, oh, this is really interesting. Oh, son of a gun, she just dumped a whole lot of information on me. Clever girl.
And exposition is really hard. So if you are writing something and you're like, oh my God, what is this exposition? I don't know how to start my book. None of us do. So Mark Twain had a thing where he said that you're going to end up rewriting the first 25 pages of your book no matter what you do, and it's true. Or at least for me it is. So if you don't know how to stick in your exposition, that's okay. Just keep going. Finish the draft, have your book, and then you'll see the beginning. It's kind of like when we were in high school and we would get to the end of an essay and be like, that's what I was writing about. Well, the 5th paragraph's good out of 5. So just keep going. Like if you're getting tripped up on exposition, so do I. So do a lot of
You
people.
can't edit a blank page.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and
I tell you what, we'll have Danith and then Lisa. Danith, you go.
okay, yeah, you just start writing because inevitably, wherever you started writing, when you start a short story or a book, that's not going to be your beginning anyway. That's just you kind of getting some stuff set in your head. And then when you go back and look at it, you'll say, okay, no, the story doesn't start here, the story starts down here.
I have a student. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, also, just going back to what your character cares about and what they're really going to interact with. Because, like, you know, I have a 9-year-old son, so of course I write all about childbirth and Avalon and blah, blah, blah. And then I'm like, the main character is a 13-year-old girl who is not going to care about any of this. So it's like, this is not the story for any of that information to come in.
Oh, I was just saying, I have a student who, when they don't know what to write in a particular space, they just write Richard Nixon. And so they can find all afterwards and then fill in the things. I personally write Gaston, because I don't know, it just like, it became a joke. Like you write something that you know you're not going to write ever for any other reason. The name of a president, or a Disney villain, and then like you can do that find replace thing and go back and fill in the insert here's. Like if you're writing about a carpet and you don't want to look up the carpet, just go insert here, and then you can go back when you have time in spoons if you really want to know what the color of that carpet is.
I think there is a very important lesson here, which is don't fret the carpet colour.
There will be somebody out there who will use your story.
That's true, but you know, there's always going to be somebody who is going to know a bit more about something than you do. Like, I think you've got to be kind to yourself to some extent.
I think also depends on what you're writing about. Like World War II, if you get facts about World War II wrong, you're going to get nailed because there's how many World War II addicts out there. But if you're doing something that's a little bit more obscure and just isn't as well known, and he's an ad, it's more of a niche thing, you can probably have just a little bit more dramatic license.
There's also the Tiffany problem. Which
Oh,
is
yeah.
That, no,
I got really overexcited.
No, go ahead. I've talked a lot. You can talk about the Tiffany problem.
Oh, well, it's just that Tiffany sounds like a really modern name. Like, oh my God, Tiffany. Why would I do an American accent?
It's okay, we make fun of ourselves.
But like, it sounds like a really modern name, but it's actually a medieval name. Like, there's records of it in medieval, like, census information and things. But if you put Tiffany in your, like, medieval romance, like, people are going to be like, I don't believe this character exists.
1 out of 5 stars.
You know? Yeah, isn't it? Tiffany? Who? DNF. But yeah, I mean, it's that thing of what people expect to be true as well. And you get that a lot, because I write fantasy, so I'm into that medieval stuff, right? And you get it a lot in England anyway, where people just find it very hard to believe that medieval Europe and medieval England wasn't just white. And it's like, no, there's historical records, you know, we part of Europe, like people travelled, but there's a lot of struggle with that, and you think to yourself, okay, yeah, like you say, oh, this is all woke, and you're like, no, it's not, it's historical.
Yes, just remember, people have this pesky habit of migrating.
Yeah,
I had an
who would have
anthropology.
thought?
Yes, there's this anthropology professor, no, actually, sorry, history professor who, and I know I've heard this a lot of places, is when two peoples meet, the first thing they exchange is goods, the second thing they exchange is jeans.
That's wonderful. Yeah. Sorry, I'll get us back on track. So we'll stop in a few minutes for questions from the audience. But before we do that, let's ask our wonderful panel a couple more questions as well. So how can setting work? Let me try and think how I'm going to word this question. How can setting interact with character in a way that either makes the character's life horrible or really helps the character? How does setting interact with the character? I guess on a personal level. Does anybody want to go first? Would you like me to start? You should start.
I should start.
Okay, Joe, you've been thrown to the wolves. How does setting challenge or help a character?
Usually, in my case, the setting allows me to determine things like distance and speed, so how long it will take to get from point A to point B, which can create some tension in that sense, because if you have to get from point A to point B in a certain amount of time, and you want to do something tricky along the way, it's really hard to do if, it's a set amount of miles and you have to get that far in that time. But for the most part, with other settings, like in a fantasy setting, it becomes a question of how the things that we historically know exist versus the things that will exist with magic. Castles are great for stopping a siege, but not so much when the other side has a dragon that can fly over the wall. And so then you need to redesign castles to also defend against dragons, and how do you do that? And doing that ends up creating characters, minor characters all along the way, and so the setting kind of starts to inform characters as it's going.
I have a short story, Aurora Compared to the World, and it takes place in a modern, semi-future Kenya, so I had a setting that really exists, and it's a magical realism situation, and so I was able to use the setting. You had said something like earlier in our emails about a setting being a character. Boy, as I developed the story, that setting became a character, and it was a character that added complications to the story, but ultimately was the salvation of the main character in the human character in the story, and so. It caused some difficulties, especially the cultural structure, and then the physical, geological structure of it saved a group of people. So it was really fun to work that out.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. So the setting is really pivotal then to your character's survival.
Well, yes, and our survival is very, even now as we're sitting here, our survival is very dependent on what happens with the geography around us. Iceland is one of my favorite places. I really like Iceland. I was there once, would go back in a flash. But they've got volcanic eruption that they always have threats of volcanic eruption, and they've got some major volcanic eruption going on now. And it is like very, very close to the city, to a town that they completely had to evacuate. It's also which I never hear in the news, it's also really close to the airport. And when you live on an island that is dependent on things coming and going frequently, that can have a real impact on your ability to survive on that island. And so I haven't seen anything about it, but I'm really wondering what the impact of not having a reliable air service is having on an entire country. And that could be a story.
Yeah, well, I think though getting to, well, like, I have this whole thing where Avalon is an island, and historically there was the idea there's a war and all the trade systems collapsed, so now they actually legally have a mandate of stuff that they have to have a certain cache of it for emergencies. They have a stricter government than we do. But as far as setting, I just want to say specifically, because I'm knee deep in writing this right now, so I have my climax where I have my main character, Hyatt, is fighting against several bullies, and one of them's a werebear. And so basically what it is, she basically fights and wins because it shows how powerful she actually is. And I had this whole story where her friends figure out what's going on and they're ready to break up the fight. And then I'm like, okay, if the friends get there too quick, because the whole point is to kind of show off how powerful she is, that she wins by herself. So I was like trying to think of what kind of a barrier, and I'm like, wait, this is a really rocky island, so if there's like a cliff, or, you know, I was thinking like, you know, there's a river that goes through, there's like a cliff, and the vampire can jump across it, but everyone else, it's like, you're going to be running down a mile to get to the bridge, and then get to the area where the fight is, which is also in like woods, and this is not like, I mean, this is pretty old and dense woods, so I'm just like, just using that setting to be like, I can totally explain why these other characters don't show up until the end.
I think setting, so my first thought was, well, my main character in this book is a time traveler, so she is defined by where she is and when she is, especially when it comes to like her life story. But then I was like, well, that's just kind of all of us though. Like, time travel powers are not. Like, what year we're in governs how much power we have or how little power we have. Like, what are our privileges, and what strengths and weaknesses does the world around us have, and how does that affect us? It's the whole thing of like, well, if you were a time traveler and not a straight cis male, like, how fun is that really going to be for you? And even then, you're not going to have penicillin. Or maybe you will, and then you'll be okay. Who knows? That's a whole other story. Anyway.
Yeah. When she goes back in time the second time, she makes sure to bring penicillin.
Yeah, so I think that also like where we are, so that's a when we are, but where we are does the same thing. And there's some really cool stuff that can happen by really grounding yourself in like your hometown and being like, how did this affect me? How did this shape me? And this is something I've been thinking about a lot because we just moved up here from Nebraska, which is a completely different world. And it's just like, wow, there's people with clean water and air, and we can breathe up here. That's amazing. There's a park. So that's cool. We have rights. But also just thinking about like back to Chicago, like one thing that is really interesting about that specific geographical area is that you've got this bustling, dense city and then nothing because of the lake. And so at night, if you look out to the lake and you look out to the city, it's just all these lights and all these cars and all these people, and then the end of the Matrix. And I always just thought that was super cool. And so when it came to writing the book that takes place in Chicago, I was like, the living live in Chicago, and the other world, the world's end, the world to come is the lake. And so I think that where we live and when we live really defines who we are and really defines our characters.
That's excellent, thank you so much. Yeah, I think it's very true. I know in my time travel novel, I think you can use setting as well to put those limitations onto characters, especially if you write speculative fiction or read speculative fiction where you can end up with people who are very overpowered. And I think setting can be a really useful and natural way to kind of put some limitation on them. So like, for example, in my time travel novel, you get like altitude sickness, so you can't travel so far back in time because it makes you sick.
That's so cool.
Yeah, thank you. But I think that's a really good use of setting. As a writer, that's what I found, is setting can actually be a really good limitation on your characters as well. I'm going to throw us open to the lovely audience now. Before I do, thank you, Sam. Gender person. I'm not allowed to gender people, sorry. Before I do, I'm making a mess of that. Before I do, please could I just let you guys know that there is a blood drive going on at the moment, so if you are able to donate blood, that would be very welcomed. I'm told there is a great need for it. And also, I've been asked to let you know that the con is still looking for volunteers as well. So if you are feeling like you want to donate a couple of hours to this fantastic convention, they would greatly welcome it. Okay, that's it. Yeah, you should have coloured cards around. So if you wave your card, then I will draw on your card. Yellow card, thank you.
So, when you're building a whole new world in which to draw your characters, how do you balance the tension of trying to describe a lot of this new world and over espousing the beginning versus fitting some of it in later on without it becoming the surprise at this plot twist that you never would have guessed in the characters? Because there must be some balance. If you get too many of those, you would have never guessed this, but now my character can survive because of A. It just becomes like the old mystery novel thing. Well, here's the murderer in the last 10 pages.
Short answer is editing. I, a lot of times, will write the beginning of it and do as much exposition as I need to do with the intent of, okay, I'm going to delete these first 20 pages. Or at least I'm going to put them in a separate file that's for me and not going to be part of the story, so that things will come out. But then when there's specific instances where a character needs this special thing about the setting in order to succeed, I always make sure that that is mentioned long before, so that we don't run into the, oh yeah, of course he can jump across this bridge, because didn't you know the gravity here is lower? I want to make sure that that's going to show up somewhere much earlier, so that the audience just, as you're leading up to it, has more the feeling of, oh good, the bridge is coming out, but the gravity's low, you should be able to jump this. And have them have that idea rather than doing it the other way around. And the best way to do that really is with editing. When I'm writing through, I may end up having it just show up. But then you got to foreshadow.
So, has anybody ever heard of Chekhov's gun? So that's a really fun tool to use. So Chekhov was a playwright about 100 and some years ago, and he had this idea that if you put a gun on the mantle in Act 1, then by the end of Act 3, it needs to have been used. And so it's kind of, you're burying things, you're setting things up. So if you're going to use a tool, make sure that it's like, and then I have this gun, oh, like it's not going to work, and people are going to feel, I know that like, you're talking about mystery novels, there was one that Agatha Christie wrote where she didn't play fair with the mystery, and like people liked reading Agatha Christie because she, like, you could figure it out if you were paying attention, and if you couldn't, it was because like, oh, I didn't see it, dang, you know. But there was one where she just like pulled somebody out of the blue and like the last whatever, and it was like, this guy, you haven't met him yet, but he's been here and killing people all along. And so that's not playing fair with the audience. I think it's really cool to set something up and then bam, like in your climax or end of Act 2 or beginning of Act 3, whoa, it's there. I think that is the best way to not make it look like a such and such machine.
But it is a really delicate balance, because if you do it wrong,
Yeah.
You end up with something, I think it was in Michael Crichton's Prey, where like on page 50 or 60, we walk past an MRI machine and somebody goes, we need to make sure that doesn't turn on or it'll destroy all this. And then 200 pages later, the nanobots go out of control, because of course they do. And then there are another 200 or 300 pages of people going, what can we do to stop these nanobots? And I got through the book across the room, because it was like, use the MRI machine you guys talked about on page 20. So you do have to be careful that you don't forget that you put in the hints earlier on.
Just since you're on prey, I threw that book across the room too, because I thought, okay, these nanobots actually, I thought, well, you know, with a little bit of suntan lotion and some sand, you could take those nanobots down in a flash. And how about a leaf blower?
Right.
You know, a leaf blower would have done it, but anyway. To get back to your question, sorry I diverted. It helps if you can work it into the business of the story. You know, not just that there's a gun on the wall, but he was cleaning his gun and hung it up on the wall. You know, so that there's some action involved in giving the information rather than just the straight information of like, oh, he had all these things on the wall and one of them happened to be a gun.
Yeah, I mean, Chekhov was a playwright, so it would have just kind of been put up there.
Yeah.
How much you designed it, that's a good
But
point.
having the action of cleaning the gun is also good, because then you are saying, this is not just a set piece, this is a gun that works. And so I would
And
fire.
he's familiar with it, they are familiar with it.
Right. It's like if a character finds a box that has a special potion, don't reveal what the potion is 5 minutes before they need to use it. Reveal it right away. And then when they need to use it, have them go, oh, right, I've got that potion, let me go get that.
There is, well, I should say, there's no rules in writing, there's suggestions. But the idea of every scene is supposed to be doing more than one thing. So you can have, in like this idea, like wherever the climax physically takes place, you should have your characters be there at some point beforehand, and it could be something totally innocuous, just so you don't have to spend time writing the climax and physically describing the area where it's taking place. You want to spend time talking about the whole climax. And so I would say for me, one of the advantages of being in a school is that sometimes when you're like, okay, I can do all these classroom scenes of like they're explaining blah blah blah, and then to get background information, I hit on this idea of what they're going on field trips. So they're going on a museum field trip. So the Museum of the History of the Island, and they have paintings, and like there's this whole painting which is just a visual representation of, you know, this historical idea. This is the, you know, the before the war times. This was the devastation after the war, and just going through, and also, you know, well, I know what I'm doing with this, but going through and finding that, you know, something interesting in the artifacts there that is going to pop up at some other time.
And since Agatha Christie was brought up, I couldn't say for sure if this is true of every single thing that she's written, but many of the things that she's written decide at the end of chapter 3 who the killer is, and you're probably right, because everything after that is misdirection and getting you to look at the squirrel, you know?
McPherson's and red herrings.
Let's have another, oh wow, pink, and then if we've got time, pink and then blue. I'm sure.
I'll try to be direct. How do you incorporate your story's themes into your setting?
How do you incorporate your story's theme into
I guess it depends on if you're writing from theme. I think that a lot of people, the themes just kind of naturally pop up as you're writing. And so for me, usually the setting comes before theme. But I guess that if you are doing theme before setting, which is also completely valid, you could think, what is the best time and place? What is the best world for me to showcase this conflict or explore this theme?
In my time travel novel, which I mentioned earlier, I really wanted to talk about consumerism and the way that it affects choice, and how there's this psychological thing called the burden of choice. And it's very bad for you psychologically. And that was very easy because then the setting is obviously going to be a hyper-consumerist society where you've got 27 types of chewing gum that you're constantly forced into small choices, big choices every day. But I had a very clear theme for that, so I think maybe if you don't, I guess, it would be harder.
Yeah.
I don't know, theme can be tricky because a lot of times it can be like a third draft. Then you realize that you're revising, and I think it's one of those when you get to what the theme is, a lot of times the easiest way for it to pop out is through descriptions. Because there are multiple different ways to describe the same thing, and depending on the feeling and the theme you're getting to, some of these motifs that keep on reappearing without being too obvious about it.
I agree, theme is definitely something that you're deciding on in a later draft, usually. You might have the kernel of it, like I want to write something about this, about X, and that can be kind of a guide, but you maybe really don't know what the theme statement is going to be until you get to one of the farther into a later draft. But how I think of it is I do think of it as mood with the setting. You know, what kind of descriptors do you choose for the setting? And to do something that's complementary to what your theme is. So if your theme is really dark, you're going to want to have some very moody kind of descriptors for your setting. If your theme is, you know, life is hard and then you die, you're going to make some choices about. Sorry, but I see a lot of books like that.
I'm going to just give Joe a chance to answer so we can squeeze in the other question.
Really quickly, I would just say that the way to do it is with the minor elements of setting. So when a person goes to a coffee shop or goes to a store or something like that, then if you know your theme, you can make sure your description focuses on what that theme is. And while that does often come in later drafts, if you go into it knowing, okay, I want to have this theme about consumerism being a problem in our culture. So when we go into the store, I'm going to have somebody haggling over the cost and somebody else saying, this is a store, you can't haggle, that's not how it works. And have that as kind of the minor thing that the character then comes into. So you have it as sort of a side detail, and that's how you keep reinforcing the theme.
I think, yes, there, Lou, and we'll have to have very short answers, guys.
As your story evolves, have you ever encountered a situation where the character no longer matches the world, or the world doesn't really match well with the character? And how do you approach situations like that?
Caleb.
Yes, and I moved it from space to Iowa.
Kill them, move them.
Yeah, one or the other.
This is a very brutal but decisive plan.
Yeah, like, the setting where the character has to go.
Yeah, I mean, you can kind of lean into that and have it be a problem for the character that they no longer fit the setting. They can actively be railing against the fact that they're stuck on a spaceship when really they just want to be out in the open.
This is like the Forever War,
Yeah.
right? When he comes back, he travels in time and time dilation. Every time he comes back to Earth, the culture's just changed.
Yeah, and then you have somebody who is already on the outs, and it kind of gives you a chance to be able to explore more of the setting, because whether or not they started as one, they've now become an outsider. And so you can use that to kind of do, rather than the info dump, a little bit of information, a little bit of explanation.
I'm so sorry. I'm going to call it there because we've got 2 minutes left, and I'd like to give our panel a chance to let you know where you can, I guess, buy their amazing books or see them on other panels. So I'm FTV. I'm in the dealer's room. Come and say hello. Have some sweeties.
I'm J.R. Dawson, jrdawsonwriter.com. You can buy First Right Thing at the bookstores that exist. And I'll be on different panels. And tomorrow we have a gender fluid panel, and tonight's Judaism and Spec Fic with Naomi Kritzer as the moderator, which is going to be really cool. And then there's another one tomorrow that I'm blanking on. So I will pop up places.
Lisa Hario, I'll be on the Busking Viking Myths panel at 2 2 p.m. As well as I do have a blog, Dark as Medieval, although I haven't updated in a long time, but hopefully we update soon.
I'm Danith McPherson, and I am doing a reading with Wordslinger Way at 2 o'clock today, and I will have books for sale at that time. And I also have bookmarks sitting out on the table by the water that have information about how you can get my books. Thank you for coming.
I'm Joe Weinberg. I sometimes write under Joseph Weinberg. You can find me at Dr. Joe Writes, either on TikTok, Instagram, or just drjoewrites.com. And you can find my books on Amazon or anywhere else.
Thank you so much. What a great panel. Thank you.